I already know that this video is going to be a little bit controversial because I'm going to show you how you can replicate an artist's style in Midjourney. Now, I know exactly what many of you are thinking.
That's easy. I can just add the artist's style into my prompt.
Sure, you can do that. But what if you could achieve something very similar without referencing the artist's name? Whoa, that's right. I'm going to show you how you can replicate any art style that you want. Well, almost. Let's dive right in. Before we get started, let me quickly introduce you to the artist that we'll be using for this demonstration. Arthur Adams. If you're not familiar with Arthur Adams is an American comic book artist who is best known for his intricate and detailed artwork. He has worked with Marvel Comics, DC Comics, and various independent publishers. Adams is particularly well known for his work on X-Men, Godzilla, and various superhero titles. Needless to say, his art style is popular and well known across the board, even if you've actually never heard of him. His art style is also known to Midjourney. So if you enter things like in the style of or by Arthur Adams, you'll most likely get things that look very much like the art style that he uses. Let me show you some examples straight from Midjourney. Here are some typical examples of superheroes. Here's a close-up portrait of also a superhero. And as you can see, his art is often also associated with black and white drawings. You can usually fix this by simply adding in full color to the prompt, like in this set of images of a refinery compound. And even though some subjects are uncommon for this artist, Midjourney is still pretty good at getting the style right. So if it's that easy to replicate an artist's style in Midjourney, why would we want to do it without referencing his name? Well, there are a number of possible reasons for this, and many of them are hotly debated. I personally never reference an artist directly unless I'm doing it for educational purposes. And I also prefer to use text-based style prompts so that I can fine-tune my prompts and styles to my liking. And especially because not all artist styles necessarily work as well for all types of different scenes. Plus, I just like being surprised by the randomness that Midjourney sometimes has to offer. Alright, so enough about Arthur Adams. Let me show you how this is done. I start off by opening up ChatGPT because we're going to use its vast knowledge in order to try to extract the essence of Arthur Adams' unique art style. And I'm also going to do this using GPT 3.5 because everyone has access to it. You could probably get better results if you were using GPT-4, but for this type of use case, 3.5 is pretty much good enough. So I started off by asking ChatGPT if it knew who Arthur Adams was. It confirmed that it was aware of who he is and what he does. This is obviously crucial for this method to actually work. I then asked it to describe his art style in 4 to 5 keywords. Its response was great, but not really in the format that I needed. This is an excellent example of why it's so crucial that you formulate your prompt correctly. So I clarified what I really wanted it to do. I needed descriptive words that I could use to craft a prompt for Midjourney. Its next response was excellent because it really broke things down into concept. You could easily just convert all of these into a long string of text and add them to a prompt. But since I'm a lazy man, I asked it to put it into the correct format for easy copy and pasting. And sure enough, it did just that. I really liked the little footnote that it added, cautioning me that Adam's style is mostly associated with superhero and fantasy genres. That's exactly what I explained at the beginning of the video. But I wasn't done yet. So I asked ChatGPT whether Adams used a typical color scheme in his art. It then explained that Arthur Adams is mostly known as a penciler. This also explains why Midjourney will frequently generate images in black and white. The very same thing happens whenever you use the term line art, for obvious reasons. However, ChatGPT also added that the colorists will usually choose a palette that helps add depth to the line work. And it also said that the colors tend to be bold and saturated for Arthur Adams' style. This is really useful stuff. So now that I had a good description of key aspects of his art style, as well as some detail on his color scheme, I tried to figure out whether there was a term that summarized his style in a single term. ChatGPT gave me a bit of a duh answer. While it's obviously true, I didn't find that very useful for what I was trying to achieve. I asked ChatGPT whether this term was considered a recognized art style. The reason I did this is because I was looking for a word that I could reasonably assume Midjourney may have been trained on. And ChatGPT confirmed my concerns by explaining that it's a common type of art style, but also used in many different fields of art. This obviously makes it difficult to distill it down to the unique case of Arthur Adams' style. So I decided to ask ChatGPT to name a formal art movement or style that best fits Arthur Adams' style. And this time it gave me something useful to work with. You could argue that image comics is a bit generic, but it's actually not. And to be fair, there's even a publisher that is called Image Comics, so it's quite likely that there is more than enough visual material on the internet. Next, I asked ChatGPT whether it could attribute a typical mood to Adams' art style. On the one hand, it said it was difficult to reduce it to a single typical mood. Then it presented me with some concrete examples of different moods. But ironically, it ended up by offering up a generalized theme of fun and adventure. Since most of its responses are just way too long for my taste, I asked it to reduce it to 2 to 3 keywords. Its response was perfect, with 3 very useful phrases. Once again, being the lazy man that I am, I asked for a proper formatting. ChatGPT is always so polite. It apologized for its oversight and served it up on a silver platter for me. Since this seemed to work quite well, I asked it to do the very same thing with Adams' typical genre and theme. And sure enough, it gave me 2 to 3 useful phrases that I could use in my prompt. So now that we've gathered all this useful information, how do I turn this into an art style that I can prompt in Midjourney? Let's start off with descriptive keywords. Do you remember these? We decided that we didn't want any references to characters, so we were left with the first 2 as well as the last 2. These form the core of our style prompt. Then we add the overarching art movement or style at the beginning of the prompt. From our list of moods, we'll keep the second and the third one and add them at the end of the prompt. So the new prompt looks like this. And finally, from our list of genres and themes, we'll go with the second and the third option as well. We add them to the end of our prompt, completing our full style prompt that is meant to replicate Arthur Adams' style. Using this style prompt, you can now more or less create any image that you like and maintain this art style that looks strikingly similar to that of Arthur Adams. And this text prompt does not require you to reference him in any particular way. In fact, the words you've used have absolutely no direct link to him as a person. And for all intents and purposes, this style could literally be anyone's style. But you're probably wondering, how close is this to the actual original? Well, let's find out. Here's a prompt for the inside of an alien spaceship. As you can see, I start off with the subject of the image. I then add the entirety of our newly crafted style prompt and simply add some parameters. What you'll immediately notice is that most of these images are black and white, and this is actually totally in line with what we would expect. Remember, Arthur Adams is a penciler, and intricate line art is essentially the phrase that triggers this. Luckily, consistently adding color to this is much easier than you might think. All I need to do is add a very small detail. Notice the full color phrase that I've added after the overarching art movement? That's it. Problem solved. As you can see in these images, they're now in full color and still use the same art style. So how does this style compare to the original Arthur Adams? Well, let's have a look. Here's what the prompt would look like if you wanted to reference the artist explicitly. It's just the subject followed by the artist and also the full color phrase. Even though I'm convinced that you'll find good reasons why you believe that this one is better, more detailed, or completely different from the first one, let's face it, the style is strikingly similar, and also similar enough that you would probably have a hard time telling the difference if you did not see them side by side. Unfortunately, the examples that I've shown you here aren't really ideal for that sort of comparison. If we really want to compare these two prompts, then we'll have to use the very same seed for each one of them. Let's whip up our original prompt one more time. The only difference is that I've set a seed. Everything else about this prompt is exactly the same. So let's have a look at the inside of our spaceship using our style prompt. And then we do the very same thing for Arthur Adams using the exact same seed. Now the inside of the spaceship looks like this. I know it might be a little bit difficult to compare them like this. So let's check out each quadrant side by side. Here's the top left. Now the top right. The bottom left. And finally, the bottom right. And of course, these images are still different. However, if you pay close attention, you may notice that they aren't as far apart as you would have originally thought. So the much bigger question is, what exactly does this tell us about how Midjourney replicates artists' styles? Are the names of certain artists just keywords that trigger a certain collection of descriptors? Unfortunately, and I gotta be completely honest here, I just don't know enough about how large language models, diffusion models, and embeddings work under the hood. But obviously, this does raise some interesting questions. Before we finish, I'd like to share a few more examples. I shared some of these images on social media a few weeks ago. While I do think that there is a superior level of detail in the images that directly reference Arthur Adams, I do think that our style prompt comes really, really close. And it's also interesting to see how the seed maintains certain similarities. You can't really see it very well, even though the images are shown side by side. So the best way to check is to just flip back and forth between both images. That's when you really start to notice the similarities in certain areas of the images. It's not very obvious if you just look at the composition of the images. Here are the prompts. And I'm using a seed of 2023 on both of them. And here's the side-by-side comparison, starting with the top left. Now the top right, bottom left, and the bottom right. Pretty neat, isn't it? Just imagine what this means for your very own work. You no longer necessarily need to rely on referencing specific artists if you do not want to. And who knows, you might just discover new variations of a specific style that you actually prefer. Either way, I think these are some incredibly interesting insights into how styles work within Midjourney. If you enjoy learning completely new methods of prompting, want to spice up your workflows, or just need some ideas on how to bring your projects to life, then I recommend you check out some of these videos and playlists. Trust me, there's something for almost everyone. So keep on learning and take care.